like being dominated by a 2-year-old. No one does. And so if the child hasn't mastered himself and started to act in accordance with the prevailing social norms, you won't like them. Well, you think, oh yeah, I will, because you know I'm a good person. It's like, no you won't, and no, you're not a good person, so don't be thinking about that at all. It's just not true. So when he was contrite, then he'd come and then, you know, we just go on like nothing had happened, because that's what you want to do, right? As soon as you get compliance, especially if the compliance is in the best interest of the child, you want to reward it instantly, right? That's the right thing to do, because so then, and you could just see him gaining control over himself. And so really what was happening is in his mind, in his brain, we'll say, there was a war between the psyche, the ego, that was starting to become integrated, you know, and starting to become a continuous person, an identity. And it's fragile in 2-year-olds, and it can be disrupted all the time, and it is. That's why they're so hyper emotional. It's fragile, that little ego, and it doesn't have a lot of power. And so what you want to do is reward it when it wins. You know, it's when he gets control over the underlying motivations. You want to say, hey, good work, man, good work, kid, you did it, you know, you got yourself under control, way to be. And the kid's really happy about that, because it's actually not that much fun to have a temper tantrum. It's exhausting, you know, it takes you over. Question?
Yeah, can you give an example of what you would reward him with?
Oh, just a pat on the head, or, you know, that's good, or kind word, you know, or whatever. Or, yeah, notice it, pay attention, that's it, pay attention. And that's it's a great thing to know with people, like in your relationships. Here's the key to a good relationship. It's not the only one, but watch your person carefully, carefully, carefully. And whenever they do something that you would like them to do more of, tell them that that was really good, and mean it. And it's not manipulative, because if it's manipulative it won't work. It's like you have to say, wow, I'm so glad you did that, and you have to be precise. Here's what you just did that I thought was great, and oh boy, that's so nice that you noticed, I can't believe that you noticed. It's like, you know, you do that 20 times and the person will be like the rat that's just pushing the lever for cocaine, you know. So, but no, I'm serious. Skinner established this. B.F. Skinner noticed this a long time ago. Reward is intensely useful in terms of modifying behavior, but the problem is that it's really hard to notice when things are going right, because you're kind of primed to notice when things are going wrong, and so you use threat and punishment more often as agents of shaping the people that you're around, because, you know, when everything's going right, it's like, what are you going to say? Everything's going right. It turns to zero. You just assume it, and that's not good. That's not good. You want to pay attention, and if your person, your children, your wife, your whoever, your mother, your sister, if you want to rectify your relationships with them, and I'm not saying to do this in a manipulative way, it won't work, but if they do something that's promoting harmony and peace and goodwill, it's like, attend to it, tell them that you noticed. It's like, it's so useful, and you have to get rid of your grudges and your resentment to do that, right? Because you're kind of mad at your sister, and then you notice she does something good, you think, there's no goddamn way I'm going to reward her for that, so you ignore her when she does something good. It's like, that's brilliant, that is, because then you've just punished her for doing what you want. And people do that with their kids all the time, you know, because they let the kids dominate them, then they get resentful, then the kid will run up to them to show them something that's kind of spectacular, and they're not happy. They're like, oh yeah, that's, you know, I'm working. You know, little kid is all sad about that, and he's just learned something. So, and it's not perhaps what you want him to learn. And so you have to keep your relationship with your children pristine, and that means that you can't hold a grudge or resent them, and that means that you have to help them learn how to behave so that you like them. And that way, if you like them, and you're kind of sensible, and maybe your partner also likes them, so you know you got a consensus going there, there's a reasonable possibility that other people will actually like them too, including other children, and then the world will open up to them. You know, then you'll bring them to people's houses, and the people will actually smile at them and give them a pat on the head, instead of thinking, oh my God, that brat's coming to visit again, I wonder what he'll break this time. You know, and that's just a horrible thing for your child to experience repetitively in situation after situation. All they learn is that adults have a false smile, but they're really lying all the time. God, it's like a bit of hell, and there's a lot of children who are trapped in that. It's really awful to see. I can see kids like that when I walk down the street, you know, it's like, they're little doomed things, and there they are, and you know, they're screwed in 15 different ways and there's no way out of it. It's really awful. So I would not recommend that you do that. It's better to notice that you're a bit of a monster, or a lot of a monster, and notice that you are much happier with the people around you when they behave in accordance with reasonable social norms, and then you actually feel genuinely connected to them and you want to work on their behalf so that everything works out. But if you think you're a good person and that you'd never do anything that was harmful to your children, then you can just forget about that, because you'll never take it seriously enough to actually learn. So, alright, so anyways, we live inside this story as far as I can tell, and you know, we kind of put the story together inside us to begin with, and that happens between 2 and 4 when you're integrating those motivations and emotions into a relatively functional unity, right? And that does happen between 2 and 4. If you don't have your kids socialized by the time they're 4, you might as well just forget it. And I know that sounds terribly pessimistic and all of that, but I know the literature on trying to rectify antisocial behavior in children, and after the age of 4 it's virtually impossible no matter what you do. And the reason for that is that kids who are still acting like 2-year-olds when they're 4, that, you know, they're twice as old, as a 2-year-old. That's a lot of difference. Like a 4-year-old's an adult as far as a 2-year-old is concerned. And so if the 4-year-old is still acting like a 2-year-old, that's really not good. And other 4-year-olds will come up and, you know, do a little play invitation like a dog, and you know, the kid, the 2-year-old, 4-year-old has no idea how to react to that, and so the more mature kid thinks, oh well, how about I play with you? And then that kid is isolated from the peers, and after 4 you're mostly socialized by your peers, and so you just fall farther and farther and farther behind. You're more and more alienated, you're more bitter and angry, and no wonder, and it's just not, you can't rectify it. So that's useful to know. It's like your job from 2 to 4 is to turn your child, help turn your child into a functional unity, and by 3 they should be functional enough as a unity within themselves so that they can concentrate on a voluntary goal for some reasonable length of time, which is also why it's useful to let them spend some time alone so that they can learn to amuse themselves, because if they can't amuse themselves they're not going to be able to play with other kids. And then by 3 they're sorted together enough so if another 3-year-old comes along they can at least play in parallel, and may also be able to start playing a cooperative game. And so that's often a fantasy game, you know, pretend. And so what the kids will do, sometimes they mediate it verbally, but sometimes it's more acted out. It's a combination of the two. They'll assign each other roles. They'll do this with you too. It's like, let's have a tea party. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means let's sit down and act out the act of sharing food and see if we can get that right. That's what the kid's saying. We'll have a little tea party. You know, it's very important because human beings share food. Like, this is a major thing to get right, man. And so the kid will say, well, you be the mom and I'll be the dad, and you know, we'll make a little fort and that'll be our house, and we'll go in there and we'll run our roles, and you know, we're acting out family. And if we're both reasonably civilized as 3-year-olds, we can concentrate on that goal. We can establish that little fictional world. We can negotiate a mutual goal, and then we can run the simulation. And that's what kids are doing when they're pretending. It's bloody brilliant. That's play, man. It's like, it's brilliant. It's absolutely unbelievable, because, you know, if you're going to play mom, let's say, it isn't like it isn't exactly like you imitate your mom, because imitation would be, you know how annoying it is when someone copies you. So, you know, you're sitting like that, and then I do the same thing. It's like, that's really annoying. And that isn't what kids do. They don't act out the precise actions that they've seen the target of their fantasy display. They're way more sophisticated than that. They watch their mother, let's say, like hawks, and then they start to extract out regularities in their behavior, which is mum behavior, let's say. That's what makes you mum, whatever that is. And then, so it's like they look at you across time and they extract out the regularity that makes you mother, and then they try to embody that regularity in their pretend play, and then they sort of encapsulate or incorporate the spirit of being a mother or being a father or whatever, or an animal, because they'll play at that. And so that's what they're doing. They're using their body and their mind as dramatic forums. It's really amazing, you know, it's so sophisticated. And no other animal does that as far as we know. And it's the platform on which language is based, you know. First of all, we imitate. And language is imitation, right? Because we use the same words, right? So it's imitation. It's a big deal. So you can act out someone else, and then you can conceptualize them in fantasy. And it's only way after that that you could maybe articulate it. Like, what does it mean to be a mother? So I could have you write an essay about that. Well, you'd have to think about it, right? You wouldn't just automatically know. But if someone hands you a baby and you know you're not completely socially blind, you roughly know what to do after you're done with your initial nervousness. You roughly know what to do. Don't drop it. That's a good rule. You've probably figured that one out at least. You know, don't yell at it. Don't startle it. Give it a little pat maybe. Try hugging it. Maybe you go like this, you know, you make eyes at it. You know what to do. It's built into you, you know, it's built into you. But that doesn't mean you could lay it out as a series of rules about how to be a mother. It's like you could write a whole damn book about that. So, alright, so anyways, you live in this story. And first of all, you get your own story together. And that's by integrating your motivations and emotions together under social influence. You know, Piaget kind of states that before the age of 3, kids can't really play. They're egocentric. And it's not exactly right, because you're actually playing with your mother from the time you're born. So even with breastfeeding, that's a social interaction, and it's a complex cooperative endeavor, and it's often hard for mother and infant to get that right, because it's complicated and it requires a lot of social interaction. Like, well, the child has to learn not to bite, for example, you know, and the mother has to learn not to be too nervous, and there's a lot of social bonding. It's really complicated social interaction. So the child, the infant, even at the earliest stages, is already engaged in a complex social dynamic that's essentially play-oriented. But it's, you know, it's pretty primordial. It has to do mostly with the mouth. And child's mouth and tongue are already hardwired at birth. So your child is this is a Freudian observation as well, your child is almost all mouth and tongue when it's born. The rest of its body, well, you watch infants, like, even when they're, how old? 7 months, 6 months, 4 months, I can't even remember now. You know, they'll move their arm and they kind of go like this. It's like they have got no fine control. It's more like they have, you know, clubs on the ends of sticks. It's like that. Their nervous system isn't thoroughly myelinated. They don't have control over themselves. But their mouth and tongue are already wired up. And so otherwise they wouldn't be able to swallow or nurse. So the oral element is extraordinarily important for a young child. That's why kids put everything in their mouth. You know, even when they're a bit older, it's like they see with their tongue, which of course everyone can do. You know, if you put a block in your mouth, you can tell that it's like a cube. You can tell that it's a cube without looking at it. So you can see with your tongue, you can see with your hands, you can even see to some degree with your ears. Anyways, so there's social interaction right from the beginning, but for the point of simplification, you might say, well, first the child organizes themselves into a functional unity under the pressure of social dynamics, and then they get unified enough so that they can attain unity with another child by setting up a fictional world and cooperating and competing within that, because that's quite interesting too, because, you know, people often juxtapose cooperation and competition as if they're opposites, but they're not opposites at all. Another Piagetian observation. So you say, well, is hockey a competitive game? And people would say, well, yeah, but then you think, well, really? Really? No one brings a basketball, right? So we're going to play by the rules. That's cooperation. Well, are the teams competing against each other? Well, yes, but they agree to compete within a particular landscape, and they all cooperate to maintain that landscape. And so you do the same thing when you're playing Monopoly. It's like you're trying to win, but at the same time you're cooperating. And that's society, man. That's society right there. You're cooperating. That's the big enclosure, and within that there are regulated competitions. But to separate those artificially and say, well, one's competition and the other's cooperation is just, it's just not very smart. It's not observant. That isn't how it works. And games are intensely cooperative, even if they're intensely competitive. I mean, the hockey teams are playing the same game, that's the cooperation. Then each team, there's competition within the team to be the best player, let's say, but everyone wants that because everyone wants good players to emerge, but you still cooperate like mad with your teammates, and if you don't pass and you know, play like a reasonable person, then they're going to not be happy with you. And so even within that competition, cooperation is regulating the interactions. And then you can think, this is a really good thing to think too, is like, you know, people often say to their kids, it doesn't matter whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game. And the kid, of course, has no idea what that means. It's like, what do you mean? I'm trying to win. And the parent says, no, it matters how you play. And the kid pushes them, and the parents really can't come up with a good explanation of why that's the case. They might say, well, other kids won't play with you if you're, oh, there you go. Because you could say, this is something to think about. So there's a game, and there's a victory within the game. But then there's the set of all games.